We're going to look at the birthmarks and the death markers of America. This is not going to be a Bible study. This is going to be a biblical lecture, a biblical analysis. I believe it is one of the most important messages of our times. What is about to be conveyed to you is going to impact your family. It's going to impact your marriage. So while people think, why are we talking about this stuff? I can assure you, I can prophetically see where it's all headed, and it's going to impact your family. And you need to on that day, be prepared as a believer in Jesus Christ, as the early church was willing to give their lives for the cause of Christ. This is where we're at in the midst of a national crisis. There are stages. Not only is the nation of Israel a template to look at how God deals with a nation, the rise of a nation, the fall of a nation. When you study history, and I'm highly interested in history, what makes a nation successful and effective, from the rise of a nation to the fall, the collapse of empires. And these 5 stages, these 5 phases always show you how a nation falls. Phase 1, rejection of God. It always begins with the rejection of God. We know that. But the rejection of God always leads to the defection of man. Man leaves his station. Man becomes corrupt. Man becomes contagious in his corruption. Man is no longer living out his divine design. He is no longer reflecting the image of God. And of course, that leads to the infection of immorality. Everything man touches, every sector of society becomes infected by immorality and disorder. Institutions that were supposed to be good are now based upon greed. Things in our land that were supposed to be supportive for the flourishing of humanity and family are now oppressive. Now, that happens because we're sinners, which is interesting because the next phase is usually the breakdown. Immorality has checks and balances. God has given us government for that sake, Romans 13. He has even instituted family with the authority of a mother and a father that institute the restrictions upon their children. It's for the flourishing of humanity. But this 4th phase is what we are seeing. It's a protection of lawlessness. So instead of regulating lawlessness, there is a protection of lawlessness. Of course, God raises up prophetic voices to warn those people, which is the 5th and final phase. And it's an ejection of prophetic warnings. When nobody wants to hear God warning them anymore, they not just reject, they eject that voice. They, like a athlete getting ejected from an arena, there's an ejection. You're out of here. We don't want to hear it because it's offensive. When you see those 5 phases, and I'm asking you to consider, is this where we're at? Now, you know how I teach, I obviously look for different ways, alliteration, sticky statements, so you can remember it beyond the message. And I was looking at the first letter of each phase or phrase. Maybe there was an acronym to be had. And I kid you not, as I'm looking at the first letter, RDIPE, a word began to materialize that jumped off my notes, and this was that word, just like it came to my mind. And it was confirmation that what undergirds the fall of a person, pride goes before destruction. What undergirds the fall of a church, what undergirds the fall of an organization, what undergirds the fall of a nation, a people, is always pride. See, a nation will rise or fall based on whether it follows God's law. And God's law, which ultimately, universally, is jurisprudence. Universally speaking, it is God's moral law that governs the world. Where civilization grows, God's moral law governs. Doesn't mean man follows that moral law, which makes it interesting in the timing that the Louisiana governor recently mandated that the 10 commandments were to be instituted and displayed in every public space of education from kindergarten to state-sponsored university. And what you watched was people in an uproar about God's moral law. Don't murder, don't steal, don't lie, don't bear false witness, don't steal somebody's spouse, don't covet somebody's property. There is no other God besides the one true God. Don't take his name in vain. Don't construct any graven or idolatrous images. And then there's honor the Sabbath, honor mother and father. Like, why I thought it was significant is because you're gonna watch a divide. You're gonna see where the heads of states, governors, stand with God's moral law. See, Romans 1 tells us, and even as they did not like to retain God in their knowledge, moral knowledge, God gave them over to a debased mind to do those things which are not fitting, being filled with all unrighteousness, sexual immorality, wickedness, covetousness, maliciousness, full of envy, murder, strife, deceit, evil-mindedness. They are whisperers, backbiters, haters of God, violent, proud, boasters, inventors of evil things, disobedient to parents, undiscerning, untrustworthy, unloving, unforgiving, unmerciful, who, knowing the righteous judgment of God, that those who practice such things are deserving of death, not only do the same, but also approve of those who practice them. Does that characterize our land? And then a culture that affirms those ungodly behaviors? Now, make no mistake, the law of God is a mirror that reflects our condition. It's also a tutor that brings us to the only power that can save us from sin. So the law is necessary in order to explain the goodness of the gospel of Jesus Christ. That is why having that like a mirror in every public space is important.